Let's start by reviewing the different parts of the starting code. Java applications always start from the main function. Here, it is in the INFO-H-400 class and it only does one thing: create a main window and make it visible. The main window is the graphical interface, and it is an extension of the JFrame class. In addition to the form elements, it defines a default list model, which is used by the JList object to determine which elements should be displayed on the lists. The elements in this case will be a list of patients, which we have to get from the patient controller. Now the patient controller has a fixed list of patients, created the first time the getAllPatient method is called. It creates patients and persons, which are attributes of the patient. We could also use inheritance and make patients extends from person. The main window can now link the JList and the default list model. Finally, we define an update patient model function, which fills the model from the list of patients. The patient list value change method is called when the event's value change is triggered in the JList. It gets the selected patient and fills the form with the appropriate values. We see that the Add Patient button doesn't do anything at the moment. Let's have a look at the results. We see that there is a problem. The social security and the date of birth are mixed up. By checking the design, we can see that the two text fields were switched. We can easily switch them back, and the code will now run as expected. The three buttons don't do anything yet. We begin with the Add button. We can quickly create an action by double-clicking on the button in the design interface. The view shouldn't directly manipulate data. The only thing that the view should do is retrieve the values from the form and call the controller. We can do that in one line using the getText method of the text fields and the getSelectedObject method from the dropdown. The creation of the patient should be done by the controller. which now has all the information it needs to create a patient and a person. We will put 0 as the ID for the moment. The ID will be handled by the database. At the end of the video, we'll also show a method for handling them directly in the Java code. We can now add the new patient to the array list. If we try the code, we see that it doesn't work. The reason is that we still need to refresh the view so that the JList gets the updated information. We can now see that the new patient is added as expected. Let's now work on the Edit button. We start in exactly the same way by creating the action. We must first select the correct patient, which we get from the selected index. We now have to call the controller in order to update the model. The controller doesn't know yet how to edit a patient. We have to create the new method. NetBeans does part of the job for us. We now just update all the attributes from the patient and person objects. We shouldn't forget that first name, last name, gender, and date of birth aren't directly attributes of person, but of patient. We could use inheritance to make it possible. Or we can just use the getPerson method to follow the links between the objects. Let's now test the edit feature. It works. Now we can do the deletion. Again, we start the same way as usual. And we again will call the controller to actually delete data. We can here just remove the patient from the array list. And don't forget to update the model. We can now see that we can remove, add or edit patients. Finally, let's deal with the IDs. This is optional as we will later use the ID from the database. What we can do is add a static attribute to the patient and person classes, which will remember the last inserted ID. Each time we create a patient or a person, we will update this last insert ID if it's bigger than the one we have in memory. To check that it works, we will also display the ID in the toString method. This last insert ID is a static field, meaning that it is a class attribute and not an object attribute. Class attributes will be shared by all instances of that class. When adding a new patient or person, we can now make sure that they get an ID that wasn't given before. We can now try it. Even if we delete some data, it will always continue to give new, bigger IDs to the new data.